Aerobic training is we know that's very good for our heart. We know it's very good for our metabolic health, and we know that our metabolic health is very related to our brain health. And when we do aerobic training, is we see like an acute sort of shock happening within the brain in terms of like a good shock, and a release of key neurotransmitters and stimulations within the hippocampus, for instance, is primarily targeted, the anterior cingulate cortex, which I mentioned previously, and general sort of brain health. Whereas resistance training, we're starting to see that it can have wide benefits for overall brain health, but it can also reduce the risk of things what we call white matter hyperintensities. And these are just sort of like some, in simple terms, of like scarring or a bit of wear and tear within the brain, which is just a bit of sign of brain aging. And we think that resistance training, from some of the work we've done in the UK Biobank, is particularly good for reducing the risk or the buildup of these white matter hyperintensities over time.
Wow, okay, I'm just writing that down, because white matter is something I've been reading a lot about recently. I mentioned in the beginning, obviously you've done so much research in this area, and one that really drew my attention when I was kind of looking at today's things we're going to talk about, which was very hard to narrow down, was if exercise can actually make us smarter. And I know that you carried out a trial with ASIC recently, and it was on Amazon Prime, and I found this really, really fascinating, actually looking at how can exercise help support our cognitive functioning and maybe reduce cognitive decline. So can you talk a little bit about the trial that you did and the outcome? Because there was actually a real significant benefit that you found, which I found really interesting. And how did it matter in terms of resistance training versus aerobic exercise?
We've known sort of generally that exercise is very good for your brain health. And people, for instance, who do exercise in the morning or continue to exercise tend to feel sort of sharper, sort of have better clarity of thought throughout the day, and sort of able to sort of problem solve, etc., more clearly. It's kind of like kickstarting your brain in the morning, for instance, or doing it later on in the day, because it's really sort of like a good exercise for the brain. So, but of course, it's not mutually exclusive. Some people who don't engage in regular exercise or physical activity have equally good sort of brain function. But for those, who do it, you tend to see this, boost for people. But we were really interested in the particular of this Mind Games documentary is what happens to people who never exercise, and what happens to people who are functioning sort of at a really high cognitive level. So we included within this context of people who weren't engaged in regular exercise for at least the previous 6 months, and who were sort of functioning really well within a specific mind game, such as chess. Like we had some speed cubers and then some like esports players as well. I wanted to see, if these exceptional people who were all competing at least at a national and most at an international level from over 21 countries around the world, if we gave people a structured, personalised exercise program over 4 months, introducing people to exercise for the first time, many forever, since they're a child, what could we do for their cognitive function? We measured cognitive function through various objective cognitive tests, and essentially what we found is great global improvements from when we started to when we finished over 4 months for people, and then various sort of improvements in various subdomains such as problem solving, reaction times, and so we see some really beneficial improvements. But people also had much more improvements in well-being, in their calmness, confidence, less anxiety, and many of these other factors too. So we were able to sort of demonstrate that yes, you can, sharpen the brightest minds with exercise.
And people who are listening to this, I'm sure that, lots of my listeners engage in quite a lot of physical activity. But do you think this will still be quite beneficial for those who maybe are exercising? I think it's something that obviously these people, this kind of cohort that you studied, as you said, weren't engaging in exercise, so we're probably seeing a real uplift. But actually it's showing that getting away from your desk or trying to engage in that morning's exercise is actually really important for high performers or individuals that do actually have quite an intense job. Because sometimes I think we might put that as the last thing that's important to our work. But actually what I'm kind of reading from your research is actually it's really important to try and make time for this.
It's kind of like for people who are already functioning at a very high level, perhaps people who are functioning very high level at work or in other areas. It's just like the best MOT that you can give your brain and your function. It really helps you sort of declutter within your brain, helps sort of things organise and within the brain, and almost like a release valve when we're on sort of high alert within our jobs or roles, responsibilities, busy lives. Then exercise is really like a de-stressing mechanism for the brain, and helps sort of turn the gas down and turn the volume down for people who are very sort of high functioning, and just release at the end of exercise, and just helps everything come down, decompress, and sort of sort and file everything out within the brain, because we need to sort of make sense of everything that's happening within the brain. So yes, it can improve function, and yes, it can help improve relaxation. We all want to maximize brain health over the course of our lives. And we know from like Lancet Global Dementia reports and other things is that physical activity and exercise is one of the key modifiable risk factors to preserve lifelong brain health. And, this is really important that we're sort of doing this across the lifespan, because yes, we want to function really well today. We want to, have great attention, great focus. We want to be our best. And we know that the brain and how we feel is variable, but on average, if we keep doing that, on average, we will be better. But yes, we want to preserve our brain function for more down the future. And the time to maximize our brain function for tomorrow or down the line is today. And sort of one of the interesting trials that we're doing at the moment is looking at people who, are 45 to 60 who don't have any objective cognitive deficits. So if we do objective tests and test people's cognition, we don't find any deficit, but they are starting to have, starting to feel some sort of like brain fog or self-report that they're not quite as sharp as they once were. And we know that if we want to preserve cognitive, we want to turn this around so it doesn't become an objective deficit. The time to do that is when people are just starting to report some symptoms. And we're doing that in a randomized trial with aerobic and resistance training at King's. And we're looking at, can we stimulate, hippocampus neurogenesis? And then we're looking at the role of the gut microbiome and stool samples with that too. And I think that's one of the exciting studies that we're doing also.